Good morning to everyone. It's good to see you today. As Mike mentioned, I probably will be a little bit lengthy today, and so in advance I apologize for that, and understanding that if you have to leave and beat the Presbyterians over to furs, I understand. We've been going through the family life series, and we're picking out things that matter to family life, things that relate to family life. A few weeks ago, Brother Mike Berry made the analogy of marriage to a diamond, and he said that inside that diamond you always see the light, right? You look at the diamond and it's, no matter how you look, it looks like it's down in the middle of that, and that's like marriage. There's a core to marriage, and the core is to demonstrate the image of God by modeling Christ's relationship with his people, the church. And we see that from passages in Genesis and also in Ephesians. It's a fundamental truth, and that is the purpose of marriage. However, like a diamond that has several faces, there are things or purposes or things that are accomplished or impacts of marriage that are sort of tertiary to its main purpose. And sometimes we confuse those, he pointed out, and those would be to subdue and populate creation, Genesis, for companionship, Genesis 2, for the complementarian support. That's a big word. It just means that we're made for each other. And that's taught in Genesis, to bear and raise children, Deuteronomy and Ephesians, and to prevent immorality, 1 Corinthians 7. Those are all functions or impacts of marriage, but the core of marriage is to demonstrate the image of God by modeling Christ's relationship with his people, which is the church. Today we're going to talk about what starts a marriage, the vows. And I hope, and my prayer is, by analyzing and thinking about the vows from a scriptural point of view, it will help those who are married to do what they said they would do, and for those who are not yet married but will be, to understand the impact and importance and power of these vows. And that's what we're going to do. Let's reread the text, and I've got to move along because I've got quite a bit to cover today. But I do want to reread the text because we find so many truths in this text. The Lord God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him." Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field, every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all livestock and the birds of the heavens, the beast of every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs, closed up its place with flesh, and the rib that the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, "This is at last bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife are both naked, and we're not ashamed." Silas, I am going to need your help. Sorry about that. Just stand right there for a moment. I got to talk about this for a moment. Silas, your great-grandfather served in World War II. And he served right after we took Japan. He was served in the occupation of Japan during World War II. And he was a military policeman, and he worked the war crimes trials. He stood guard over General Tojo. Some of you who know General Tojo. He was in General MacArthur's honor guard. You know, the people that hold the flags and get to go. And knew General MacArthur's wife on a personal level. I've got some pictures of him. He just looks so sharp as a military policeman. He befriended and became a part of a Japanese family in a small village named Hokkaido. And the old man in that family gave him this gift. This was this sword of a Japanese soldier in World War II. We don't know if it was used to draw American blood. It may have been. But it was the sword that a Japanese soldier carried into battle. And this elderly man gave this to my father. And my father brought it home from Japan, and it currently resides in David's gun safe at his house. And so it's very much under lock and key. And this is not a toy. This kills people. You understand that? And it's heavy. It's an amazing sword. I would like you to pass this around. Make sure everybody gets to see it and hold it. I would not pull this out and feel of the edge. It's not as sharp as it once was, but it's pretty sharp. Please be careful with this as he passes it around. We'll get to what this is about in a moment. We'll come back to this. I want to carry on with my sermon, but please pass this around. Careful. I'm going to need this back. Okay. So if you see somebody running out the door with it, okay. All right. We'll get to what that's about here in a little bit. But I wanted to get it being passed around while I'm talking. The Bible begins with a wonderful marriage in the Garden of Eden, a marriage conducted by God. God joins Adam and Eve together. What a setting, what a place in this Garden of Eden. The Bible ends with a great marriage, a city coming down out of heaven, like a bride adorned for Christ the groom. Christ riding in on his horse, stained with blood, having conquered his enemies. Now coming to this great wedding, his bride adorned in beautiful white array. This marriage to be eternal. And these two weddings, these two sort of symbolisms of marriage are bookends in the Bible. And each of them, as you think about them, come with vows. And we could spend a lot of time and break down these passages and learn about these vows. I want to just think about it quickly. There in Genesis 2, the passage that we read, there is inferred certain elements of vows in that, or promises that are incumbent upon those who will be partakers in it. It is not good that man should be alone, God declared. Part of the vows. Later on, Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. So Adam has a need. There's an empty spot, a need that must be fulfilled. When you get over to Christ talking about this in Matthew 19, Christ describes what we read this morning and says, "What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." Now, without going through a great detailed unraveling of all of these texts, here are some of the elements of the vows that made up that first marriage. There was God's part. God observed that Adam needed a suitable helper. Adam was not complete as he was there in the garden. He needed something. God created woman from Adam, and God brought woman to Adam. You remember in your wedding when the preacher said to the man, "Consider her a divine gift, a gift from God." This is why God brought Eve to Adam. The woman is a gift from God to man. We should look at it and think of it that way. Adam has a part here. There was an urgency of need. If you read different English translations, the Hebrew carries with it this idea of, "Oh, at last." Adam said, one of the translations, "So the man exclaimed, 'At last,' when God brought Eve to him." Oh, at last. The need was so great with Adam, and Adam recognized it. There was an urgency of the need. Recognized this complementarian relationship. She is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Some people accuse Christianity of being a patriarchal relationship in marriage, and it is not. That is patently false. It is a complementarian relationship that Christianity calls us to, each of us having our different and respective roles that we play that work together to create the perfect marriage. That's what the Bible teaches. The Bible does not teach that the man is this somehow oppressive boss in the home. He's the head of the home, certainly. It does not teach some role that woman is some sort of a sub-element, less than human or whatever, like some people have said through the years. Not at all. The Bible teaches a complementarian role, and Adam acknowledges that when he says, "She's bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." Then the narrative, which is God speaking, we find out from Jesus, the narrative provides comment on this. First, the narrative says that the man shall leave father and mother. So part of the vow is, the promise you're making is that you're going to leave your home and you're going to go create a new home, a new family. Another element is that you'll hold fast to his wife. You'll create a new and lasting relationship. Hold fast. That's what God says of this relationship. And that you'll become one flesh. This is something that you can't be separate. You must be together. And then again in Jesus' divine commentary, the one flesh union is executed by God and cannot be undone by man. Now, when you go to the last marriage, the marriage at the end of the Bible, it's very similar. This marriage at the end of the Bible also has vows that sort of underpin what it's all about. It records there in Revelations that there were some whose name was not written in the book of life, others whose names were written in the book of life. There's a codifying, an accounting of this. It's an official thing that happens where it's recorded officially, this marriage at the end of the Bible. When you go to Romans 6 is a great chapter that to me really lines out the vows of heavenly marriage. It describes all of these elements of what it means to be this new person in this new relationship. The old person gone, the old person died. You have left that home and now joined to a new home, so to speak. And if you break all those things down, you see that, well, these vows are recorded in heaven in an official record. God has recorded it, this heavenly marriage that we are in. The vow is codified as a part of a visible ceremony when a person is immersed in baptism. The execution of this vow is symbolic of a much larger truth, as we'll talk about in a moment. And the vows demand a transformation of one's way of life. You must be different. Making this vow and entering into this relationship demands that you change who you are. These are elements of these vows that we see both in the first marriage in the Bible and in the last marriage of the Bible. But what about the vows that we took? If you're married, you stood at the front of a church building or maybe in front of a judge or somewhere, and somebody read some words. And they read words that might sound something like this: "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here together in this place." And it may have included words like, "Wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor, and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, keep thee only to her so long as both shall live." Spelt L-Y-V-E. Old English was somewhat different than our English today. And then the I do part. I state your name. Take thee, state your name, to my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer with a Y, for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us depart, according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I plight thee my troth. Plight, troth. Beautiful words, aren't they? These words come from the English Common Book of Prayer. When the Church of England began to break off from the Church of Rome, they felt like they needed to write their own liturgy. And so in the late 1500s, early 1600s, they began to craft what now we know as the Common Book of Prayer. The Common Book of Prayer has really largely defined Christianity ever since then. When you were married, somebody bought a book, some preacher bought a book that had vows in it, and that book was taken from this. What's interesting about those men that began to write those English words instead of using those old Latin words, the men that began to write that, they didn't go to the Latin and try to translate them into English. They went to the Bible. They did what you think you should do. They went to the Bible and they said, let's construct from the Bible what these vows should look like. Let's do what we just went through quickly, that exercise of understanding what are the promises that you make when you get married. What are those promises? And so they began to put together these vows that we just read. If you're not married yet, when you get married, somebody will read vows that look a lot like that. Those vows were written in the late 1500s. It took a little while to get them all put together. There's a bunch of people working on it. Around 1600. And that was their best understanding of what the Bible requires, the promise the Bible requires we make in order for God to join us together in marriage. Well, I want to look through those vows. That's what I want to do. I want to take these vows and think about them. What do these vows mean? Where do they come from in the Bible? And what behavior do they suggest of us? Because these are the promises that you made. This is what you said you would do. And if you're yet to be married, this is what you're going to say that you're going to do. So it's pretty important. The vows include language that says the person presenting the vows will say something to the effect, living together after God's holy ordinance of marriage. Living together after God's holy ordinance of marriage. This statement infers several things that are biblical truths. Number one, that God owns the subject of marriage. God owns the subject of marriage, not man. As a matter of fact, our country, it was in the 50s, the middle part of the 20th century, before really it began to even be considered a thing that would be tracked by law. And that was only because tax laws were created that made it necessary to do so. Marriage has historically always been a function of a religious observance. Before the church came along, it was enjoined by fathers of the family in other ways. When the church came along, the church began to be the arbiter of that. Elders and leaders in the church would be the arbiters of what it means to be married. Because it is God, not man, that determines what a marriage is. So when you see in the news that some person is going to marry their donkey, and I'm not making that up, by the way. No, they're not. They may have some weird relationship with their donkey, but they're not going to marry their donkey because marriage belongs to God. And God is the one that decides if you're married or not. And let's listen to what Jesus said about marriage, because he did define it very clearly. Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? That's the first criteria. Male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. I worked in the mechanical industry for years, and one of the greatest jobs I ever saw installed was in a building out at Tinker Air Force Base, building 2280. It's a paint hangar. Some of you work there, I think. I think Butch maybe used to work there, does work there. Well, above the ceiling, up in the attic of that building is all this 6-inch stainless steel pipe. And I've watched a lot, I've been around a lot of welding in my life, but I watched the best welders I've ever seen weld 6-inch pipe up there in that attic, put it together, and it was marvelous to see. It was just amazing. And I have a photograph here of stainless steel elbows welded together. And you know the thing about that welding process? You can't take it apart. The only way you can take that apart is to unweld it. Heat it enough to melt the filler out and take it apart. Because a welder put it together. Now you might cut the pipe and you might do a lot of other things. Thanks, just like right there, John. You might do a lot of other things, but you didn't take that weld apart because that weld was put together by a specific stainless steel welding process. When God puts a wedding or a marriage together, only God can take it apart. I don't know how else to say that, but that's what Jesus said. Only God can take it apart. So when you make your vow, or when you did make your vow, it became a matter that is out of your hands. You said, God, we are turning this over to you to join us together, and only you can separate us. Now, there's a lot of things we could talk about in regard to that this is not the place and time. I just want to state that out there. That's part of the vow that you made. You made that vow. Are you going to keep your word? The second part of the vows are several statements that we'll think about for a moment. Love him or her, comfort him or her, cherish him or her, and honor him or her. These are the statements that are the same for both parties. Cherish, comfort, love, and honor. And the scripture is filled with that concept. Timothy 2, 4 and 5, and train the young women to love their husbands. Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives. 1 Corinthians 7:33, but the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. I'm going to come back to that one in a second. 1 Peter 3 and 7, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. Hebrews 13 and 4, let marriage be held in honor among all. The Bible's filled with these words that describe our marriage relationship: honor, love, and cherish, those concepts. 1 Corinthians 7, an interesting passage, says that the man who is married is concerned how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. I read that for years thinking, well, that's just the price we pay for being married. Paul is encouraging people there at Corinth that because of the persecution that's coming, that now may not be the time to start a family, to get married. And that's the warning he's giving them, 1 Corinthians 7. But he says, it's okay to marry. It's just that particular circumstance they were in. And then he offered a reason why. His reason why is that the married man, and I think you could say the married person, is anxious about things of this world, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. Paul doesn't say that because it's a bad thing. Paul says that's because it's true. It should be that way. That is how it is. Husbands, you should be concerned with things of this world and how to please your wife, how to honor her, cherish her, and comfort her, keep her, all those things. Wives, Paul assumes this to be true of you, that you should be concerned about your husband and how to please him. It's not that it's wrong. Paul's saying that's how it is. That's how it's supposed to be. And I put that verse out there because that's really helping us understand what these vows are all about. Love him, comfort him, cherish him, honor him. Honor. And we could spend a lot of time talking about this. Honor. Let's just think about that one. Let me get my sword here for a second. I'm glad you guys got to pass this around. Honor. When this came around, I suspect most of you held this and said, wow, this came from World War II. This may have drawn blood in battle. This belonged to a soldier. Wow. That's kind of what it means to honor. You hold it in high value. You cherish it. David keeps this in a safe because he didn't want somebody to make off with it. I said what I said to begin with so everybody would be careful passing it around. You honored this. I tried to get a bar of gold, Mike, but I couldn't make that happen. Honor. This is what you said you would do, husbands. You said you would honor her. You would look at her every day and go, I can't believe this is mine. Wives, you promised you would. You said, I will and I do. When he asked, will you honor him? Honor, cherish. Words mean things and you said them. How much better would our marriages be if we just did what we said we'd do? If we just kept the promises that we made. Honor, cherish. And that will be going right back into the safe, by the way. I don't know what will happen with that when me and David and my older brother dies. One of the family will get it. I would take care of that family, whoever ends up with that. Part of the vows is to keep her and obey him. Those are vows that are part for the women, and there's parts of this statement that are for men. So I want to think about the women's part of this first. Keep him and obey him. Keep him and obey him. 1 Peter 3, be subject to your own husband, speaking to the wives. Proverbs 21, verse 9, and then verse 19, it is better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome woman. It is better to live in a desert land with a quarrelsome than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. This is speaking to what it means to live with a woman in some ways. That's another one of those things that's not necessarily condemning the woman, it's just how it is. There's a reason for that we'll talk about in a moment. Train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, submissive to their own husbands. 1 Timothy 5, manage their households. The Bible is filled with teachings that can be summed up in keep him and obey him. Keep him. Keep him. Wives, keep him. I want you to think, first of all, in 1600 English language, keep didn't mean like we think of keep. Not really. Keep was the title of, or the name of at a castle where it was a ramp or a place to come into the castle, had a gate or a door or a place that could be closed, and the people around the castle would refer to that as the keep. If you've watched movies, maybe Lord of the Rings, you've heard them call it, go to the keep. The keep is where you protect, to keep it. A couple of weeks ago, to illustrate what this means, a couple of weeks ago, Warren was at the house. And I always like to have little projects to do, and so Warren was helping me with some projects there at the house. And one of them was I was trying to hang a green screen out in the shop to make our recordings and all a little better. It didn't work out, but as Warren knows, it didn't quite work out. But anyway, we're up there on the ladders, we're working and all that, and this mechanism that we had put together fell. And when it fell, it knocked a big chunk of hide off of my arm. And I take blood thinners, so I started bleeding really bad. And I jumped down off the ladder, and I mean, I just like bleeding. It was really bad. I grabbed an old greasy rag and held over it and stopped it, because I was in the shop, and that's what I had. And I held a greasy rag over it and stopped. And I don't know what compelled me to do this, but I turned and looked at Warren and said, Warren, what should I do? And Warren was kind of white and pale because there's blood all over the place. And let me tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking, do not tell Han. Do not let Han know that I almost knocked my arm off. Do not, the last thing is I want to do is get blood all over the place, because then she'll be upset that I got blood all over the place. So that's my thinking. And Warren looks at me with the most honest look and says, you got to go show that to Mimi. And I almost started crying because Warren gets it. Mimi keeps me. Every day, she keeps me. I wish I could spend hours telling you how she does that, because it's not always pleasant, but it's always keeping. Now, wives, you promised you would do that. Husbands, we'll get to you in a moment. You promised. I will keep. I will obey. We spend a lot of time talking about those. I'll move on because there's limited on our time. Keep and obey. Well, the husband. The husband also promises to keep her and provide for her in the vows. That's in those vows, and that's a promise you made. The Bible's filled with teachings about this. You will live with wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. Let me take a moment to tell you my read on that, and there's different ways people look at that. I believe the weaker vessel was, you could say it this way, as the submitting party. I believe that because my mother could take most of you men out back and work you over, I'll just tell you. She was not a weaker vessel, not at all. But she did submit to my father, and so she was the submitting person. And I think that's the sense of this text. Paul is saying the man is head over the wife is submission to that, and the man's got to know that she is the submitting party. She's voluntarily submitting to you, which means it only matters when she disagrees, right? That's the only time it matters. Otherwise, we're just friends doing the same things that we like. So men, you got to be aware of that in this relationship. And that's part of what it means to keep her. So you don't always have to go eat where you want to go eat. And the pecan pie doesn't have to be made the way that Mama made it. Because keeping her means you honor the fact that she is voluntarily submitting to you. You honor that, and you keep her in that respect. 1 Timothy 5 and 8 talks about men providing for his relatives. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I'm going to say something here that might be a bit surprising, but I can't see this verse any other way. Men, the single most important commandment from God for you is to provide for your family. Wait, Brother Mike, how can you say that? Well, let's read that. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. I don't think it can be worse than that. I don't know how it could be worse than that. The Apostle Paul tells us that our most fundamental requirement in life is to take care of our family. And that can take on a lot of shapes and meanings and ways, but here's the deal. You stood in front of a preacher and promised you would. You said, I will do that. I will provide for them and their mother-in-law and my mother-in-law too if I need to, which is what this text is talking about. 2 Corinthians 12:13. For children are not obligation to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. There's just a concept laid in that text there, but it's a fascinating concept. The Apostle Paul just assumes into fact that parents take care of their children, that they save for them, that they get everything ready, that they prepare things for their children. You promised you would do that in your vows. In this passage in Mark, I was working in Alaska, and there was a welder up there who, at lunchtime, we were setting. It was cold, too. And we were setting there, Fort Greeley, I believe is where I was at. And this man was a Greek scholar, of all things. He was a welder, and he could speak Koine Greek. It was fascinating. Member of some small independent church up there near Fairbanks. And he was talking about something. He said, let me talk to you about this passage. And so he began to unravel the meaning of this passage. It was just fascinating to listen to him explain. But here's the basic takeaway from that passage. Jesus just assumes that a house has a strong man, and that what prevents that house from being broken into is that strong man. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless first he binds a strong man. Then indeed he may plunder his house. Jesus just assumes that's the case, men, that you're going to take care of your home. And if somebody is going to successfully break into your home, do harm to your family, they're going to have to get by you first. Jesus just assumes that. Now, that's not what the parable of heart and soul is about, but Jesus assumes that facts into evidence as he makes that case. You promised you'd be that guy. You promised you would be that guy, the first one. You'd be the guy to provide, and you would be the strong man in the house. That's what you promised in your vows. When Han and I got married, we went on a honeymoon. We lived in Altus, and I had an old Dodge plumbing truck that looked horrible. But they put flowers on it and fixed it up at our wedding, and we drove it up here. We came up on a Saturday evening and went to church at the old South Penn Church of Christ that Sunday morning, our first day of marriage. June and George was there, and Johnny and all the congregation. That was in 1984. We spent the weekend up here and had a great time. My boss loaned me $75, which paid for that weekend. I don't think $75 would take you out to eat now, but it paid my boss. I was an apprentice plumber. He loaned me $75, and I will confess, when I got home, I had $5 left, I think, but that paid for the hotels and the meals and everything. Now, this is a little bit personal, but in order to understand what I'm trying to explain here, Han grew up in Saigon. She only spent a year or so with her American family before we married. And you can imagine all of the emotional stress from that, the feeling of not belonging, the feeling of panic you might have if all of a sudden somebody dropped you in another country and you've got to live there, and all those things. And not everything, as is always the case, not everything was perfect in that home. That's okay. It was a good home in many ways. But you can imagine what she was feeling. We pulled into the trailer house there in Altus, Oklahoma. The trailer house I barely managed to buy, but I couldn't afford electricity, so we did not have electricity for a month or two. And when we pulled into the driveway, I've never shared this, but she laid her head over my shoulders and began to cry. And I don't remember exactly what she said, but the essence of it was, I have left the only thing I know and have invested everything in you, buddy. Now that's what I heard. I don't think that's exactly what she said, but. And I'm counting on you because I've got nothing else. No place to go, nothing. That felt like a load of concrete just fell on me. And I made myself a promise right there. I'll crawl through every sewer in Altus, Oklahoma, if that's what I got to do to provide for her and our family. And it hadn't always been pretty. Because I promised I would. I said I would. Men, when you stand in front of the preacher, you make vows. Were you lying? Or are you a person of integrity, and do you plan to keep those words? Keep yourself only to him, her, and thus forsake all others. That line is in both of the vows, his and hers. You will keep yourself only to him or her. And the Bible teaches this, that you will not commit adultery. You will not engage of sexual activity outside the marriage. You will keep yourself to this person. And there's a lot to say about that. About a year ago, we talked some about that in our Moral Madness series in the month of March. I won't go into great detail on it, but let me talk about something here that has been very helpful to me. Billy Graham, and this is actually something they teach in seminary, they tell you for men, never be alone with another woman that's not your wife. At work, anywhere. Don't do it. Is that because you don't trust her? Absolutely not. It's because you don't trust you. That's why. If you want to be faithful to your wife, never, never, never be alone with another woman. Just don't. That is called, oddly enough, the Billy Graham rule, and it's a great rule. It served me well. Same could be said for women. This is not something that will happen easy, but it will happen. You got to make it happen. You got to work at it every day because you promised that you would. And then they end with these words, in sickness and in health, better or worse, richer or poor, till death do us part, and sometimes so long as you both shall live. No matter what happens, she gets cancer, and you are there to the very end. Or Alzheimer's, and you're there right to the end. Or his diaper has to be changed every day, and you're there right to the very end. That's what you said you would do. Richer, poor, we've got no money. That's what you said you would do. The book of Ecclesiastes says, when you vow a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you owe. It is better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. You know what God says to you when you break your wedding vows? God looks at you and says, you're a fool. That's what he says. And don't break those vows. Now, I work now no longer in the plumbing business. I work for a large defense contractor, and we have access to, I work on a lot of IT type projects, and we have some folks that build what's called artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's just amazing what they do. And I asked a couple of fellows out of Huntsville, Alabama, if they would help me with something, and they did. They helped make a pixelated image, two of them, that I'm going to show you in a moment. And it's really amazing. These images are able to latch on to your psyche, sort of your psychological abilities, or whatever these social scientists call it, so that when you see this image, it's going to be the image of your spouse. And if you're not married yet, it's going to be the image of who you're going to marry. And so pay special attention. I'm going to change the slide, and you're going to see that image, okay? I think every wife in here knows that's exactly who she's married to. And every husband in here will never say it, but he knows that's exactly who he's married to. We wouldn't make vows if it was easy, would we? We wouldn't have to stand in front of God and say, I do, if it was easy. Because that person that you're married to, or that person you're going to marry, is broken. And they're broken in ways that are ugly. And sometimes they have pencils hanging out of their nose and bawling uncontrollably because they're broken. And that's the person you said, I will and I do. No, it's not easy. It's hard. And unfortunately, a lot of marriages go wrong. In 1971, Carly Simon, a famous singer, wrote these words and sang this song, and it was a very popular song. My father sits at night, and she wrote this song about her mother and dad, Mr. and Mrs. Simon. My father sits at night with no lights on, his cigarette glows in the dark. The living room is still, I walk by, no remark. I tiptoe past the master bedroom where my mother reads her magazines. I hear her call sweet dreams, but I forgot how to dream. But you say, it's time we moved in together, raised a family of our own, you and me. Well, that's the way I always heard it should be. You want to marry me. My friends from college, they're all married now. They have their houses and their lawns. They have their silent noons, tearful nights, angry dawns. Their children hate them for the things they're not. They hate themselves for what they are, yet they drink, they laugh, close the wound, hide the scar. You say we can keep our love alive. Babe, all I know is what I see. The couples cling and claw and drown in love's debris. You say we'll soar like two birds through the clouds, but soon you'll cage me on your shelf. I'll never learn to be just me first by myself, by the way, which I think is a telling line. Well, okay, it's time we moved in together, raise a family of our own, you and me, and that's the way I always heard it should be. You want to marry me. Hundreds of thousands of marriages broke up because of that song. Because Mr. and Mrs. Simon couldn't figure it out. Now remember what we began with. Marriage, the purpose, the central purpose of marriage is to demonstrate Christ and his church. When you break your wedding vows, you're committing a version of blasphemy. People see it and they draw the conclusions that Carly Simon drew. It's just love's debris. When you don't honor your wife, when you fail to cherish your husband, God looks at you and says, what a fool, and the world looks at you and says, I don't guess this thing about marriage is that great after all. You need to figure this out, Christian friend. How to keep your vows, because the world is watching. And Christ is supposed to be demonstrated in what you do every day and how you treat your spouse. Now, I don't want to end on that very sad note because it is a heavy note. And there is so much joy to discuss in this subject. I'm going to go back to this text that Mike's just touched on. I want to unravel it a little bit more. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. That's a Hebrew poem. It's a 3-stanza poem. It's written in progressive parallel form. It's actually synoptic and then progressive, which is irrelevant to my discussion, but it's 3 phrases. Each phrase is repeating the previous phrase. The third phrase adds something new. Think of it that way. And I've got it laid out so you can see the parallel words. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. The first is, the first highlighted words here are talking about God, the God part. God created man. The second part is the created part, and you see that in all 3 phrases. I want you to notice the third part. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Parallel but progressive, male and female, he created them. Now, what this passage is telling us all that there is something about the male and female relationship that is an image bearing of God. When man and woman come together in marriage, it demonstrates and reveals God in ways that we as individuals cannot reveal. It's image bearing that occurs in marriage. And that's a very complicated subject, and people have written about it and thought about it for years and years and years. And it doesn't mean that as an individual you're not an image bearer, but it does mean that when you become married, you complete this idea of bearing God's image to this world in ways that you cannot possibly do when you're not married, which makes marriage a beautiful thing. What that means is when marriage is right, when you're keeping your vows, and people look at you, what they're seeing is God. They're seeing the image of God. They're seeing, is Caleb and Holly here? They're seeing Holly say of Caleb, "What are you doing?" That's what she was doing in that picture. They're seeing Matt and Michelle's heroes, Larry and Barbara Lewis, demonstrated to them for years what God looks like, what Christ and his church looks like. They're seeing Lori get onto me for taking her picture, and Terry looking at me like, "You're getting it now." They're seeing Brother Plez Barris, a man who gave a lot of you chewing gum when you were little. I don't know who else I've got up there. Brother Worthy, Raymond and Exie Cox. What a privilege and a joy it's been to watch these people. JC, and I can't even say JC without saying Gene. JC, I'm sorry. Gene and JC, I just can't hardly say it. Because you were such an object lesson in what it means to be an image of God. When you keep your vows, and here's what Paul says of it. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Listen to this next statement. This mystery is profound. This mystery is profound. But I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. It's profound. I don't suppose I could ever fully understand it, but somehow Larry and Delonda are images of God to me. When I look at them, I see Christ and his church when they're keeping their vows, when they're fulfilling what they said they would do. That's what I see. So, figure it out. You said you would do this. Figure it out. Need help? Get help. Pray. Work together. Whatever it takes, figure it out. Because you're a fool if you don't. You're blaspheming Christ and his church if you don't, and you're missing out on what it means to be the image of God. I hope you've enjoyed the study this morning. I managed not to go too long. I was afraid I would. I know this picks at very tender parts of our life. It does, and that's not my intent, but I know that it does because this is a very important subject. We're going to continue this over the next months to come. There'll be other installments of this idea of marriage and what it means to be married, how to be married, and so on. And so I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you look forward to the rest. We offer this time now an invitation for those that would like to obey the Lord in baptism or request the prayers of the church. To be a part of God's kingdom is what marriage teaches us, that union with each other of so many things. but ultimately it is all about Christ and the church. If you'd like to obey the Lord in baptism this morning, if you'd like to request the prayers of the church, come forward while we sing, and we'll assist you if we can.